Welcome back. Let's talk about the impacts that flooding has on society. So, when flooding occurs, it's not just the water that's of danger. Obviously, that's the primary hazard. The damage caused by water, the flow of it, the currents, the debris moving along in it, the erosion and deposition of sediment. So, that's the primary hazard as associated with flooding, the stuff with the water. The secondary hazards include water pollution. So the flood didn't kill me, but for some reason, the flood caused water pollution. I drank that contaminated water. I got a disease and I died. Secondary hazard. Famine, disease, homelessness. So again, the flood didn't kill me, but the flood destroyed my house. I was homeless, and then I died. So it's oftentimes these secondary hazards that can be much more dangerous than the flood itself. Remember, a lot of times with big sweeping floods like river floods, it happens slowly over a few days or weeks. You can get out of the way of those. But some of those unforeseen consequences, pollution, famine, disease, homelessness, you can't get out of the way of. So globally, from 1995 to 2015 is the biggest chunk of time, the most closest chunk of time I could find. So over that 20-year period, these are the number of people affected by weather-related disasters globally. 56% of the world's population have somehow been affected by flooding. 56%. That's more than double drought. That's way more than any storms or extreme temperatures or landslides or wildfires. So flooding is worldwide is a very dangerous weather-related disaster. When we're looking again globally at the percentage of occurrences of natural disasters by type, as far as the number of them, not who gets affected, but just the sheer number of what type of weather-related disasters occur. I'm sorry, these are just all natural disasters occur. Numbers-wise, in that 20-year period, there was over 3,000 floods, while there was just over 2,000 storms, typhoons, hurricanes, tropical storms, earthquakes, 500, volcanic activity at the lowest, only 111 events. Not that it necessarily affected people, but these are just how often they occurred. So flooding again, flooding, number one globally. Before I go on, before I forget, let me give you a part of the super secret code. It is the number 3. You got me? The number 3. One more time, the number 3. Excuse me. As far as the number of weather-related disasters reported per country, you can see that the U.S. and India and China are all up there because, remember, we're not talking about the hazard, but we're talking about disaster. 10 or more people killed, 100 more people affected, enough damage, aid requested, etc. Well, the top 3, or in the top 5 most populous countries in the whole world, China's 1, India's 2, the U.S. is number 3. So the 3 most populous countries all have the 3 highest number of weather-related disasters. Not that they occur more. It's just because since there's more people to be affected. Therefore, the likelihood of a hazard becoming a disaster goes up. Are there any benefits to floods? Have you ever thought about that? Ponder that for a second, because there are. They can provide very fertile sediment for farming. A lot of times, farms are right next to rivers, partially for the water, for irrigating, but also partially for periodic flooding, which will deposit fine sand, silt, clay, and organic matter, and it naturally fertilizes the land. It naturally puts nutrients back into the land. Yes, it can destroy a crop depending on when the flooding occurs, but you are kind of recharging the ground, making it full of nutrients, so it can be fertile to grow crops in it for another 10 or 20 years until the next flood occurs. It can have benefits for aquatic ecosystems. If a flood rushes through a river or a stream channel, it can really remove any debris, any trees or anything in there that's kind of clogging it up, kind of cleaning it up essentially. But it also can sweep nutrients and other food supplies downstream, helping nourish downstream aquatic ecosystems. You can get sediment deposition. My screen went away there. Sorry. I don't know if you saw that. My screen just disappeared. My fault. When a flood occurs, it can build up elevation and keep areas above sea level, which is hard to think about that a flood could prevent another flood. So when it floods, when the flood waters move into an area, so let's say this is dry land, you get flood waters moving into area, it could deposit some dirt and sand and sediment on this area, in essence, raising the elevation. So the next time it floods, this area is now a little bit higher because of what's been deposited on top, preventing a future flood. So flood to prevent floods. Sediment deposition, especially if it's along the shoreline, can prevent some damage and flooding caused by hurricanes. So again, flooding to prevent floods. The sediment deposition in flooding to prevent floods. Interesting to think about. All right. Can humans cause floods? And if so, how so? Have you ever thought about that? Wait a minute. Can we cause floods? We can't really control the weather, so we can't really control what's going on there. But are there ways in which we cause floods? I actually talked about one. It was actually an aspect of the most dangerous flood in U.S. history. Also, in China, during the Sino-Japanese War, there was a man-made flood. So, yes, humans can cause floods. Human activity can significantly affect flooding frequency and scale. We can't, prevent a flood for the most part. We can't just make a flood. I guess we can. We can make a flood occur. We can't control the weather, but there are things that we do, that we create, that we try to control, that just puts us in harm's way. Some activities that affect flooding include land use changes. When you change from forest land to now a giant development of houses, you're changing how the land is being used. That could increase flooding. Constructing dams, urbanization, and just growing populations in flood-prone areas. Moving into places that we probably shouldn't be expanding into. That puts us in harm's way. So we'll describe some of these things. So land use changes. For example, clear-cutting forests, and so cutting down all the trees for logging or cutting down all the trees to put up housing creates bare ground that tends to repel water. When rain falls on this area of where there was trees, which when it would rain, the trees would soak up the water. If you cut down all the trees, there's nothing to soak up the water. So when the rain falls, it runs off towards low-lying areas, sometimes carrying with it branches, soil, and other debris along with it, creating a mass wasting event, of which we'll look at in later units. So without vegetation, without solid tree roots to soak up that water and hold all that soil and dirt material in place, flooding can produce mud and debris flows, types of mass wasting. Wildfires can produce the same effect. And the wildfire comes through, burns a bunch of trees down. You're burning that mechanism that helps to soak up any water in the soil or hold material on the slope of a mountain. If you burn all that out, the same thing can happen. Great example was the Schultz fire that happened just north of Flagstaff. Excuse me, I don't know why I'm yawning so much. So the city of Flagstaff is down here. Here's the main stratovolcanoes or composite volcanoes, the San Francisco peaks. Here's Sunset Crater, a type of cinder cone volcanoes, some of those things we talked about. But on the western flanks of the San Francisco mountain, There was a wildfire in this kind of orangish area, so it burned out a lot of trees, especially along these slopes. When the monsoon season hit in here, which also occurs in Flagstaff, you had a bunch of rain dumped in that area. It hit that slope, and there was nothing really to hold that material in place or trees to soak up that water. So all of that flooded material off the mountain kind of just flooded into these neighborhoods that are just to the south. They're just right over in this area. Yeah, right over in this area right here. So all of this burnt material, water hit, floods occurred, ran right down. So changing how we use land. Another aspect is dam construction. It can create flooding behind the dam where water is stored. It can also create flooding downstream of the dam as water is released, if there's too much water, or if there's a breakage or crack in the dam. The water that's released from the dams periodically is usually free of sediment, allowing it to move faster and flow faster. Again, dam failures can also create massive flooding events, and we'll take a look at that video in lecture. A great, I say great, but quite an example of creating a dam and flooding behind it. When you create a dam, you're damming up a river to create a reservoir because you need to create a water source. Well, the Apostolimas Dam and Sventili village in Greece, you can see the village back here. They built this new dam. There it is. They built this dam and to create a reservoir. Well, that village is going to be in the way. So guess what? It's going to be underwater. So this is what it looked like beforehand. You can see the dam that was created. So this is just after the dam was created. So all of this is going to get flooded over, and there it goes. More and more water, even up into this area, this little part of the village. It will eventually be underwater. There it goes. The dam was finished in 2015. Not a lot of people, 80 residents, but they were displaced. They had to move. The dam now serves as a fresh primary source of fresh water for 300,000 people. So that's something to think about. 80 people have to move. 300,000 people get the benefit. You know? If you live in this area and you need water, you know, it's, yeah, you got to weigh the good and the bad. So the rising waters eventually swallowed up the Sventili village. And slowly underwater. There's the dam. There's the dam over there. Yep. Kind of like a ghost town. Of course, in China, the Yangtze River has a number of dams also doing the same thing, except these dams are absolutely massive. Whereas the dam in Greece displaced 80 people, the dams along the Yangtze River in China, nearly 1.2 million people are being displaced. The area that will be flooded provides fertile farmland for 40% of China's grain and 70% of its rice crop. All these dams built to generate electricity to help the growing population and also kind of dam up freshwater reservoir systems as well. So yeah, but again, the good with the bad. It's again forcing 1.2 million people to move. But will have a positive effect for roughly 400 million people who live along its kind of boundaries and what these dams are going to do. So, what are you going to do? Let's pause here. When we come back, we'll continue this conversation and talk about urbanization. I'll see you back here in just a second.